Valiant Hearts did more for my knowledge of the First World War than my entire school career in the subject ever did. It's the best history lesson I've ever had, and as I went through my campaign I was actively feeling compelled to see the events unfold through the highest of highs and the grimmest of lows. About the time of its release, it felt like everyone who was anyone wanted to cobble together something set within the scene of warfare, forcing the players to sit through rehashed tales of their character as the cookie-cutter hero who shoots, plunders, and in some cases flat out massacres because the game paints it as the heroic thing to do in order to finish it. But with Valiant Hearts, the approach to the warfare aspect was treated very differently. The war itself was treated as the enemy, and the characters you play as have to employ other methods of survival and tact to make it through their environments rather than shooting a weapon all the time. As the game's tagline suggests, Valiant Hearts is an intertwining humanitarian tale told within the events of the Great War of 1914 to 1918, otherwise known as World War I. Alliances suddenly declare their intentions of going to war against neighbouring nations, spiralling on from the catalyst event, which was the assassination of Prince Franz Ferdinand of the old Austro-Hungarian Empire. As the declarations of intent piled up, the war already began claiming its victims by ripping apart families of foreign nationals, such as we see when humble German farmer Karl is ordered to leave France to join the German forces, and abandon his wife, young child, and father-in-law Emil. Not long after, family tragedy strikes again, as Emil receives his orders to join on the front lines, as many men had to do. And thus, their stories as participants in the Great War begin, along with Freddy, a volunteer soldier from America joining the French Foreign Legion, and Anna, a Belgian student nurse turned field medic. I feel it's important to mention that the characters you play as along the Western Front are all purely fictitious, which must have been by design and done out of respect to the millions of recorded victims of the war. I think that placing real people's profiles onto the characters you play as would have been a tad insensitive, not to mention the potential legal nightmare to get any rights or licenses from the estates of the war deceased. To me, the goal of using these original characters is to give the player a general sense of the toll that the war took on people, and I was very interested by the choice of World War I as the game's setting. Because of the various patterns of alliances that existed in early 20th century Europe, people could not have been sure when the war would arrive at their doorstep. Compared to the Second World War, World War I's tribulations aren't nearly as covered or discussed, at least in an academic sense, and with the lack of attention is a greater sense of ambiguity over right and wrong, leading to the game's intended message of how literally everyone suffered as a result of the war's outbreak. You be the judge on who was right or wrong, but the accepted consensus is that the means by which all sides used to obtain victory were horrendous, scarring, and ultimately not worth repeating, yet should never be forgotten. Now with regards to how you progress. Your means of survival, 99% of the time, is not achieved by equipping a deadly weapon to decimate an opposing force, like in so many other war games at the time. The characters must use wits, stealth, and problem-solving skills to aid their allies in advancing the line, clearing an obstacle, or attending to a cry for help and administering medicine. Your objectives are to stop the suffering of your friends, but not by causing the suffering of others, if that makes any sense. Though I suppose the portrayal of some of the secondary characters can definitely be used in an argument against this philosophy, since they are painted in an antagonistic light and there are pseudo-boss challenges against them thrown in amongst the puzzle-solving centric gameplay. The narrative content does try to challenge this point by the way it resolves your interactions with those characters come the end of the game's events, once again attempting to point the blame squarely on the nature of the war itself, rather than the actions of a single person in any given moment. The puzzle solving itself is not built to become a major obstacle to progression, nor a distraction from absorbing the narratives going on. One or two moments may cause a head scratch or two, and in my experience of this, it could have actually been a case of slightly unpolished mechanics, particularly those to do with Walt, the dog companion following the four main characters. For many of the puzzle situations, the dog can be called and commanded to activate mechanisms or fetch items. These sections can become some of the more fiddly parts of the game, but the dog's inclusion is purposeful in the history teaching aspect of Valiant Hearts, highlighting the useful tasks performed by animals in the war. Another more light-hearted element are these rhythmic action sequences where the band outrun obstacles on their journey to different locales. They got a smile out of me for sure, and they help to signify that this game didn't want to exclusively deal in doom and despair. I love this! The ballet of the three cylinders. Back to chaos! Oh, this is absolutely joyous, I gotta say. The light-hearted and intrepid moments in the story highlight that there were in fact tales of bravery and heroism to be found amongst the overwhelming destruction. The accounts of soldiers from various allied nations aiding the war efforts are frequently mentioned in this game's campaign, and yet the message is still very much clear. This war was a dark time in recent human history. Millions of lives from all corners of the globe met their end in circumstances they probably didn't fully understand or even wish to participate in. The sketched and painted graphics used in the game through the UbiArt framework resemble a comic picture book in style, and, for me, show a more visceral depiction of those events than words in a textbook could ever do. Battle wounds and corpses are drawn with frightening accuracy, colour palettes make the war environments resemble a waking nightmare, and you may pick up on tiny edits that further exacerbate the suffering, such as using a red transition over a rainy scene to metaphorically show it as a bloodbath. The entire journey comes with full historical appendices, records, and realia from the events in the game, provided in partnership with several historical preservation societies and documentary films such as Apocalypse World War I, as well as secret collectibles throughout the game with further flavour texts that add yet more context and historical learning. Some people will want to power through the game, however, so these additions can be seen as a major distraction, but on a slow, learning experience, I think that they are still very much welcome here. Valiant Hearts comes at you with gut-wrenching accounts and heartbreaking scenes of human suffering as a result of this infamous period on our time on this earth, but it has to be amongst the most well-crafted stories ever created from those historical sources. It respectfully strays away from using real-life participants in its story, it never once holds back with its brutal depictions of the violence that went on in those times, but it also tells us all very important lessons with its accurate insights. This is the kind of history lesson that many players who haven't gotten around to playing this yet will be compelled to carry on experiencing. With its artistic style, that, may I add, makes me yearn for Ubisoft to eventually stay true to their promise of making the UbiArt framework available to the general public, with its focus on problem solving over straight up violent force in its gameplay, and with its delicate balancing act of providing horrific yet accurately portrayed events and tales of the goodness of humanity doing its best to soften the ever too real impact of warfare, I'm glad to have learned about the Great War through playing Valiant Hearts. It's very important that we have this game, and more of us should think about war from this game's perspective. The oversaturation and glorification of mainstream warfare game experiences can be desensitizing if not experienced in moderation, or without consideration of the context. If violence is always humanity's go-to response to a threat, we're more likely to be doomed to suffer again as all those people did over 100 years ago. Lest we forget the sacrifices of those before us so that we can continue living today, and lest we forget to produce meaningful, crafted, and poignant lessons to learn from, as Valiant Hearts does. A big supermassive hello to you all. Thank you very much for watching this review video. Be sure to leave your likes and comments down below, and if you want to see more, click the subscribe button and the notification bell icon. If you want to catch my Twitch livestreams on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays, as well as see the stream highlights, go to twitch.tv/rickb321 to find out more, and make sure to follow my other social pages on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you very much for watching, stay you and stay awesome, and I'll see you all later on.